Demon fans, and welcome back to the Demonland podcast. My name is Andy, and well, get your calculators out, folks, because only mathematics can save our season and give you any hope that we can still make finals in 2024. Joining me tonight to dissect another game where we had everything to play for, but we turned up dead on arrival, is veteran Demonlander George. Good evening, George.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening to Ben Man. Good evening to our very loyal listeners. I don't know how you keep turning up every week for this sort of stuff. Well, wasn't that retro round fantastic? It took me right back to 10 years ago when we were losing every match by a similar sort of margin. So I really enjoyed it.
It's not actually retro round yet. The Bulldogs sort of went a week early with it, but it did take us back to some darker times. Also joining us tonight is someone I think I might have finally lured to the dark side of the force, is B-Man. Good evening, B-Man.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening, George. Good evening, Demonlanders. And the scales have fallen from my eyes, Andy. I'm fully infested with MFCS. Well, no, not fully.
I knew we'd get you.
Year, I'm very hopeful about. But speaking of retro round, can I just tell you my day that I had on Friday? I thought I wasn't working on Friday, and I didn't realise until I saw 𝗙cie. Shout out to 𝗙cie for all their fantastic work this year on the 𝗙cie games, that the 𝗙cie game was at Whitten Oval on Friday at 3:00, and I thought, speaking of retro round, this is just my dream. That's what a day. So I've got a bus that stops almost literally outside my door that goes from my place direct to Whitten Oval, and I had it all planned out in my mind. So bus to the footy, Whitten Oval, sort of retro round, just great. Watch a game sort of in what is a gorgeous footy ground now. The surface is just, it is amazing. And they've just opened their new centre, which made me really jealous, of course, seeing we've got an open-air shed at Gosh's paddock. And I thought, well, great, I'll be able to watch the 𝗙cie no matter whether, as long as they play all right, no matter how, they win or lose. And then I can jump on the train straight to Southern Cross and watch the Mighty D's win. So I thought, bit of luck, I'll walk out of here with 50-50 and final still a chance. And, well, I tell you what, it was like some sort of version of aversion therapy where I came out the other end of it, spat out on the train on the way home, having a Footscray fan sit behind me for the entire match, slagging off Max Gawn like you would not believe, just getting into him the entire match. And, it was just a shocking day. It was an appalling day. And maybe we'll talk about this later with the 𝗙cie game, but just briefly, I was saying to George this morning when we had the player-sponsored breakfast, so thanks for that, Andy, I was really worried about our chances in the seniors game because our energy level at 𝗙cie was just appalling. Like the energy from the coaching staff, there were no football, Melbourne crew there, obviously we were playing, but it was early. So no one from the club was there other than Choco Williams. And I think there were a couple of the runner, I forget his name, and maybe someone else, a medical guy. The players played with, it was incredible actually watching Footscray play the D's at Whitten Oval, and you could tell one team was up and about. That's why I was right from the get-go. I was worried about the night game, the seniors game, because the doggies were playing like a bunch of players who wanted to force their way into a team playing finals, and the 𝗙cie players looked anything but. Like there were some really, I won't name names, but there were some really, really poor efforts by 𝗙cie players that just simply weren't up to VFL standard, let alone AFL standard. And I walked away from that game really concerned about the energy that we would bring to the Dogs game. And so I hate to say that I wasn't surprised with our insipid first quarter performance. So it wasn't quite the glorious retro footy day that I had in mind. And but it does feel like a flashback to times past when, Melbourne's hope was whether we're mathematically possible with 3 games to go to make the finals.
I must say I'm a little bit nervous. I don't know, nervous. It worries me about what you said about the feel around the 𝗙cie team and the energy there, because that really worries me, because I've sort of sensed, and I got that sense definitely on Friday night, of a veil of negativity, the veil that usually surrounds the supporters, the MFCSS. I think that's pervaded, and not from that, but I think the players are suffering an on-field version of that at the moment, and it's a big worry for the club. I don't know if it's got anything to do with the troubles that we've had over the pre-season, the 𝗟𝗶𝘀𝘁𝗁 stuff, the Joel Smith stuff, the board stuff. Something it's there, it's noticeable, and I think I don't know if the players think that the season's done, and obviously now it pretty much is, but it's evident we weren't playing for a spot in the finals, that's for sure.
But I mean, I think probably the more sort of, potentially more likely reason than I mean, all of those are potential factors. Yeah. But the club, all the players and the club themselves would know where everyone is up to physically. We've talked about it, and there was a question about it, so I won't get ahead of myself tonight, around the sort of conditioning and where we're at in terms of ability to running at games. But the other big factor is there's no question, 100% no question in my mind, that there's a number of players who are carrying injury. We'll talk a little bit about it in the moment, but 𝗍ici's one of them. 𝗍ici's was our second lowest player on the weekend. I mean, that's just completely unjacked 𝗍ici's. Like, apparently Max Gawn's ankle was the size of a small watermelon.
Apparently
on Friday.
Wasn't at training today either. So watch this space.
No training today. Steve May broke the same rib that he broke earlier in the season, apparently, and so I suspect there's a number of players. 𝗟𝗂 looked like he was running in treacle. Yeah. There's a number of players physically, and they would know that internally, wouldn't they?
I mean, I'm sure there's physical stuff, but there's mental stuff as well going on, and they just looked. They didn't look like a team that was, their life was on the line.
No, and that was totally the vibe at 𝗟𝗂. And as I said, I won't name names, but there were some players that I thought, well, not only were they not playing with the sort of energy of pick me, I want to play in finals footy, it was just nuts. Like, I just couldn't believe it. Bloody, what's his name? Oscar Baker was carving us up and playing with the sort of energy that, he's always played. I've always liked the energy he brings to his footy, but, there were, and what's his name?
Riley Sanders.
Riley Sanders. How many possessions did you tell me he picked up at half-time?
He had 18 in the first quarter and 30 before half-time.
He was blitzing us like he's a kid, isn't he? His first year? He was playing with that energy of pick me, get me into this side. And, it just was really dispiriting to see. It was more the effort levels and some of the half attempts where it felt to me like there was some contests where people pulled out for fear of getting injured. That's what it looked like. It was a really – I stayed to the end because I don't leave footy matches, but they didn't give me much sort of reason to stay to the end, that's for sure.
Something seriously needs to turn around. Maybe the best thing for them is not to make finals and go away and come back with their head screwed on properly.
We'll get into it pre-season.
But we'll talk a lot to talk about in the coming weeks. All right, let's get through some of the housekeeping before we talk about the match. Each week I do put out a call to our loyal listeners to help us out, give us that 5-star review and a comment on Apple Podcasts. We love the feedback, and we do reward a loyal listener each week who's taken the time to provide a 5-star review by giving them a shout out. This one was from a couple of weeks ago, actually. Max makes me gorny. He writes, love the pod, fellas. Firstly, I was very doubtful in the results of the season thus far prior to the last couple of weeks. And as I said, this review came in during our 2-week winning streak of a couple of weeks ago. And he continues saying, as it seemed as though we were slipping with confidence and direction, but how good has it been to see the young talent that is coming through and giving Melbourne a very bright future. Having silky players with speed is what Melbourne has been crying out for, and Windsor, Rivers, McVeigh have it in spades. It seems to inspire older heads to lift their game, like May, Lever and Fritter are more energised with the youth playing with such dare. Hoping to make the 8 and pinch a final would be a great result and learning opportunities. Also, not sure if you've noticed, but Nathan Jones is so anti-Melbourne in commentating. He is not only a dud commentator, but it seems a salty one too. Missing that granny still haunts him today, I think. Go D's, bring on Freo. Well, that Will from Sydney. So, Will.
I'm with Will on that. I really dislike Jonesy as a commentator when he commentates our games.
Yeah.
So I'm totally on board with you, Will.
Yeah, but look, it's hard. Look, yeah. say what you want about his commentator, but you think he's salty, but it's hard for me to be negative against him. He did carry the team for so many years.
Yeah. No, I love him as a player, just not as a commentator. But that's true of pretty much every single ex-footballer who's commentate on the game.
Well, welcome. That was a couple of weeks ago, so I hope welcome to the world of MFCSS. 3 weeks is a hell of a long time in footy, but thank you for the feedback and the 5 stars. Keep the feedback coming. We will give you a shout out on the show. You can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. If you do follow us there and you want to leave a comment or post a question for the show, give us you can post under our podcast post each week or slide into our DMs. We won't read out your name on the show. In addition to being available on Apple, Google, Spotify, SoundCloud, or your preferred podcasting app, Demonland Podcast also available to be watched and listened to on YouTube. We're certainly getting a lot more people listening that way, so search for Demonland Podcast to find our channel. If you want to chat with other Demon fans and you've never been to our forum, head on over to demonland.com. Sign up. You can chat with other Demon fans from across Australia and around the world. It's completely free. Just sign up. You'll be able to post. You can post questions and comments for this show, or you can talk to other Demon fans about all the topics and threads and just discuss the mighty Demons week in, week out, day in, day out. It's a lot of fun at the moment. So join in on the conversation. If you'd like to join us on the air tonight to talk about any of the topics that we're going to talk about, give us a call on 039016 3666. That's 039016 3666. I'll answer. I'll put you on mute. I'll bring you on when there is a break in the conversation. And during the week, you can call that number, leave a message. We'll play it on the show. If you're listening to us live, come join us in the chat room. Head on over to demonland.com/podcast. We are live every Monday. So if you want to listen to the show live, then head on over to demonland.com on Monday nights at 7:30 p.m. I still have it written as 8:30 p.m. But it is 7:30. Let's get into the match overview. The Melbourne Football Club season is all but over as their final hopes took a significant hit after a 51-point loss to Footscray. This match highlighted the D's recent struggles as they appeared disorganised and lacking energy against a resurgent Bulldogs team. The Bulldogs set the tone early, winning the first 10 clearances and keeping the Demons to just one solitary goal. In the second term, Melbourne showed some fight, reducing the margin, but the Bulldogs' dominance at the stoppages kept them in the box seat. And despite some valiant efforts by Max Gawn, the Demons just couldn't keep up with the Bulldogs' relentless pressure, their desire for the footy and their spread once in possession of the ball. In the final term, the Bulldogs continued to control the game, securing a comfortable victory. Max Gawn led from the front with a strong aerial performance around the ground. 𝗟𝗶𝘀𝘁𝗃 had a welcome return to some form. Jacob Van Rooyen showed some promise with his efforts and tackling pressure. He had 6 of them, I think the highest for any Demon. Trent Rivers and Tom Sparrow worked hard and were among the better players for the D's. D's midfield, once a strength, failed to match the Bulldogs' intensity and effectiveness. The loss of Stephen May to a rib injury further strained an already pressured backline. The team's lack of cohesion and energy was evident with too many missed opportunities and turnovers. And with the season all over, bar the shouting, the D's will need to regroup and address these issues quickly to keep their mathematical chance at finals hopes alive. I can't say that with a straight face. And we've got a voicemail from Rose Star. He didn't have a question, but he had some comments about the game. So this is as good a place as any to play that. Here's Rose Star.
Hey boys, Rose Star here. Well, I think we've run out of puff, haven't we? I think my optimism of last week has now settled into a deep chasm of realism, and I think that's it, isn't it? I don't, with the percentage we've got and the games left, I think we call it. Waited as long as I could, and George, you're absolutely right, and Andy, I saw the writing on the wall, but I, like Bin Man, sort of refused to believe it. But hey, that's the life of a Melbourne supporter, isn't it? So, but anyway, it was a disappointing game, I guess. We just, once again, let them have too much ball, and we just couldn't seem to stop that fast gameplay. We'd worked so hard to get it down our end, and within 3 handballs and a kick, they were shooting for goal. And it's not often you say a 51-point defeat flatters you, but I really think it did. There could have been a 10-goal margin at halftime.
More than that. Halftime.
Anyway, we move on. We tell ourselves it's just a game, and we play on. And I guess now all we can hope for is what I'm hoping for is that Essendon, Carlton, and Collingwood all miss the finals, and we can just maybe hang our hat on that. But anyway, boys, thanks again. And don't know if I've got any questions. I think just letting you know my thoughts. Who have we got this week? Port Adelaide. Wow, geez, they flogged Sydney, so who knows?
Now you're just rambling.
All right, boys, thanks again. We'll chat to you soon.
Thanks, Roaster. Thank you for that voicemail. That's what he said about flattering us. I think the scoreline did flatter us. We could have easily lost that by 80 points, and it was that kind of beating.
If they kick straight,
𝗟𝗶𝘀𝘁𝗁
set shots.
It was missing them from everywhere. So it could have been a lot worse in terms of the score.
And I was so flat I couldn't even bring out my jibe, from years gone past, decades of watching. Well, at least a couple of Melbourne losses of, a good team would have flogged us by 100. I couldn't even bring myself to say
what you said about you talked about the guy was having a go at Max Gordon. There were guys around us as well that were having a go at some of our premiership players, and early on in the game, I was sort of giving them a bit of stick about the grand final. But how long can we give Bulldogs supporters shit about the grand final? No,
never again after that game. It was,
is that it?
Can we cede any ground? It's like it was. For me, it was the worst game. Like maybe it was the double up, maybe it was 2 games, and it was just too much for me. But it was worse than the first Port game, Freo game. Just on Port, before we jump into the next segment, it's ironic, isn't it? Port and the Dogs are the form teams at the moment.
It happens to us all the time.
Their fans wanted Hinkley sacked and Bevo sacked. Fair income. Bevo, by all accounts, if you believe the footy media, was 1 loss away from getting sacked mid-season.
We've had that all year in terms of teams sort of hitting form as they play us, or players coming back just as they play. But we can't expect to just win games by teams being in bad form or not having their stars on the park. But it seems every game this year, we've had players coming back. Anyway.
Yeah, it was. It's like I said last week, everything's got to pretty much go right to win a flag, and we've just had straws and camels backs all year. I could believe when Steve May went off at halftime with broken ribs again. I was it's been that sort of year. Just before we go, I just want to say, because this was on top of mind. One of the real positives of that game, though, was seeing Bontempelli. He's one of my all-time favourite players, and some of the stuff he did was just magnificent. He was toying with us at one stage. He did this sort of half feint on the opposite wing to where I was sitting. It was just such a classy bit of play, and he looks in absolute ripping nick. And if the Doggies went on to win a flag, I wouldn't be disappointed if Bont gets a flag. Another one.
I think the important thing about the Bont is that he should have already won a Brownlow, and if he doesn't win it this year, it only confirms how useless the umpires are at assessing players. He is by a country mile the best single player in the competition this year. He's just unstoppable when the ball's in his hands. It's just magnificent to watch.
And it did remind me of what we lost not having track there, because who's the only player we've got who's sort of comparable, even when Oliver at his best is a different type, who's that combination of can go forward, kick goals, but is so dynamic and so clever and can literally change the game in a 4 or 5 minute period of time, and tracks that player for us. So, it was something that was a real positive to see him play, a fantastic game, but I wish it was not this week.
Well, B-Man, before you get into your stats files, we do have a suggestion from your good mate, the Pearl, in terms of what to talk about tonight. The Pearl writes, interesting stats to record from this week's pod. 1, false assertions based on misguided interpretation of statistics. Number 2, interruptions to Andy while he was trying to make a pessimistic argument.
What was that, Andy?
Good one. You fooled me there.
See what I did there?
I wasn't making a pessimistic argument. Number 3, the number of times George claims we have no one at 𝗙cie to step up. and I'm sure we probably will hear that tonight as well.
No, I'm going to handball that to Bin Man.
Demonland bingo.
Yeah, because he'll tell them the same story.
Well, the Pearl will be happy to know that in this week's stats file, there's not too much rosy to paint from that game. There's not much positive to take out of it from that perspective. There's a couple of numbers though that, for me, before I go in through the sort of red and blueprint, which is really a bit sort of superfluous given, it is in reverse. It gives us a good sense of where we got smashed. Time in forward half. So obviously the big number that people will be aware of, which I'll touch on in a minute, is that we lost 10 clearances in that first quarter. And I don't know this, but I think someone said on Demonland we had only one inside 50 in that first quarter. Is that right?
That's correct.
So time in forward half, doesn't make for good reading, particularly the Dogs who don't, they're playing that hybrid style I've been talking about all season in terms of all teams want to get it forward, but they're not a particularly front half team. That they have been much more of a front half team this year. That's absolutely for sure, and they've reduced the number of those linked up handballs, which I've always thought is a weakness of them. But the time in forward half just makes for terrible reading. In the first quarter, it was 32% to 68%, 33% to 67% in that second quarter. In the third quarter, 41 to 59. The fourth, 40 to 60 for the match. It was 36-64 their way, which is just bananas. The other data points that really I think tell the tale in terms of this match is that this is the top 10 rated players on the ground. So keeping in mind 20 is considered an elite game of AFL football. The player ratings are really, really good measure because, as I've said before, it measures the impact players have every single time they have intervened in the game is rated, whether it's a positive or negative. I think it's something like whether it's +6, -6 to come up with this rating. So it's a really good measure. Every tap, every tackle, every kick, every time they're involved in any way in the game is given a score. The top 10 players on the ground were Adam Treloar, 21.2, his player ranking was. The Bont, 21.1. Bailey Dale, 20.5. So they had three players playing over or rated over elite for this game. And I want to give a huge shout out for this fella. Our highest rated player in the fourth on the ground was 𝗟𝗶𝘀𝗁, 17.4. And you could just see he was labouring a bit, as I said last week, when he was also our highest rated player, or perhaps he was second last week. That's just a phenomenal effort. So it was Treloar, Bontempelli, Dale, 𝗟𝗟𝗀 came in fourth on the ground, our highest rating. Bailey Williams was the same score as 𝗟𝗟𝗀, 17.4. Sam Darcy, 14.8. Lachlan Bramble, I don't even know who Lachlan Bramble is, like Led Zeppelin song Bramble On or something, and he was 14.6. This one makes me weep because for all of the caning he got on Demonland, Rory Lobb would have been a great recruit for the Mighty D's. He came in 9th, and the 10th was Trent Rivers. So we only had 2 of the top 10 players were D's players. And if you drill down a bit further, it's like 4 of the top 15. And of course, the other end of the scale, Tommy McDonald was -1.1, a bad night for Tommy. This one was really sort of not surprising in the sense of he didn't have much impact on the game, obviously, but Jack Viney was our second lowest rated player, -0.8. That's really, I would suspect something's up with Jackie's shoulders still. It popped out last week. Would not be surprising at all if we hear.
He was carrying a knee bandage this week as well.
Was he? Yeah. It wouldn't shock me at all if he goes in for surgery post-haste. So, I think that sums up where we're at in terms of, that's ridiculous having only 2 players in the top 10 rated players on the ground. So jumping into the stats file, I'll jump ahead to the first area is defence, and what was the first caller? Is that Rose
Star?
Rose Star's point is spot on. I won't even talk about the actual score. Never has the expected score been more accurate. Their expected score, the Dogs' expected score in this game was 133. And I reckon I can see exactly why. So we were incredibly, incredibly lucky. As evidence of really what I'll touch on in a sec is where we really lost the game. It was our lack of pressure, but I'll go into that in a second. We just could not force any mistakes. So we were down negative 15 for intercepts and minus 4 for intercept marks. We just couldn't get the ball off them, and you can't when you don't apply pressure. Contested possessions, this one surprised me. I don't know what it was at the end of the first quarter, but it ended up being bang on level, 135 apiece. So after that first quarter, we did actually sort of get our pressure going a lot better, or at least for 2 quarters. So this is where we come to pressure, and modern footy is you just don't win games of footy without either matching or almost matching or winning the pressure stat. This stat is not one of those stats that, footy fans can go, oh, it's not important. It was specifically asked for by coaches in the clubs for champion data to come up with a way of measuring pressure in game as an example of how significant it is to the sort of thinking of footy clubs and coaches. As I've talked about before, the board that they bring out for the players at quarter time break and 3/4 time break, which, by the by, I went out to the 3/4 time break at 𝗙cie, and it's got exactly the same sort of sort of sections on it. So one's sort of general messaging, another is key stats, which in for the Doggies game, it was things like percentage of scores, trapping it in the forward line, time in forward half, contested possessions, and a couple of others. And then a big section at the bottom, which is reinforcement/solution. So, presumably the messages that the coach wants to reinforce at quarter time and 3/4 time, and the solutions to issues. And Goody often talks about coaching is about, giving solutions to the players. Almost always that section of the board has got multiple things on it. So in the 𝗙cie game when I went, that section had at 3/4 time had 4 or 5 bits of information, or 3 or 4 bits of information. At 3/4 time, because I could see through my binoculars, I was just near where they set up for their breaks at quarter and 3/4 time. At 3/4 time, that section had maybe 4 bits of information in it. At quarter time in this match, solutions had one, reinforcement/solutions had one thing only in it, and that's it. Right in the middle of it, 163, which was our pressure rating in the first quarter. And clearly Goodwin was, making the obvious point is our pressure just simply was not good enough. It felt like we were the team coming off a 5-day break. I couldn't believe it. They had the energy and we didn't have the energy. It felt like the energy just transferred from the 𝗙cie game at Whitten Oval almost directly into that first quarter. He would have been livid at first quarter time. 163 was our pressure in a must-win game. Theirs was 179, so minus 16 for us. I thought we were back in the game. We were so lucky that we weren't further down after the first quarter. I suspect of that 133 expected score, about 50 of them will be in that first quarter because they really sort of, kept us in the game. And the fella behind me who was bagging 𝗪cie for the whole game kept on talking about them kicking himself out of it and leaving us in it. And I thought we'd turned it around. And this was evidenced by the pressure. So our pressure in that game was plus 23, so 200. 200 considered elite, 180s considered AFL average, 200. So we came out and we got ourselves back on terms. It felt like we were back in the match at halftime. The game was looking a little bit more on our terms, so plus 23. We came out after halftime. Pressure was okay. It was better than theirs, 175 to 162. But what really told the tale, and probably as much as anything, the disappointing of that first quarter was mirrored by, how disappointing even more so the last quarter was. The rating in that last quarter, we could only manage 151 pressure points. It's actually 1.51. And this at quarter time, it says 1.63. They make it look a bit sexy by adding the rounding it up to 0. So in that last quarter, their pressure was 184. So we were down 33, minus 33 pressure points in that last quarter. It's not going to get it done. And, where we're deserve to be based on that performance. 172 to 176 was the match, really, and it was the only reason it was that close. So down 4 for the match, but the only reason it was in even the vicinity was that second quarter was plus 23. So that first quarter set the tone. Unfortunately, we can never claw it back. Our top 5 pressure acts, and again, as much as it was evident that Clary's he's paddling. That's for sure. And the season can't sort of finish as quickly enough for 𝗟𝗯𝗀, I reckon. But you can't knock his effort, and I just love it. So he was our top-rated pressure player, 27 pressure acts, 50 pressure points. His season average is 46, so he applied more than his season average. Sparrow was next with 23 pressure acts, Jack Viney 26 pressure acts, Nibbler 22, and the first young player in that mix, the Colt, his season average is 36, and he had 21 pressure acts for 46 pressure points. Just goes to show, I think, the sort of those young players are really struggling. So I mentioned a few weeks ago, it was the young players who were 3 of the top 5. Top 4 was all our senior players, with Colt coming in 5th. Those young players are paddling a bit too, I think. So interestingly, ground ball gets, we were +2. So that wasn't too bad. Tackles inside 50, we were +6 for tackle through the game, and which, we chased tail, so we probably should have been. But tackles inside 50, Cos, I didn't think had a great game. Another player looks a bit flat at the moment. We only managed 5 tackles inside 50. They managed 14 tackles inside 50. Again, they're playing with the energy of a team that, got a good shot at finals and I think can go a fair way. This one will get lots of talk, so about clearances, but really the reality is that it's, last week we were in total clearances, we were down 2, so centre clearances were 12 to 14 last week. Stoppage clearances were dead even. You wouldn't read about this. We were 10 clearances down after the first quarter, so they were 10 zip in clearances after the first quarter. But by the end of the match, we were actually only down 4. So for the rest of the match, we were +6. Centre clearances were 11 to 13, only 2 down on that. And stoppage clear. These are just the raw numbers, not the scores from clearances. Stoppage clearances, we only had 2 less than them, so we only had 4 less clearances in total from them. Of course, that territory that they gained, they smashed us for territory, absolutely, as I noted before, completely smashed us for front half footy. And a lot of that was in that first quarter. Winning 10 gives them territory. There's no debate there, but it's interesting we turned that around, and when I get to the scores from stoppages, it's interesting reading as well. Contested marks, we did all right in that space, 11 to 12, so only down 1. This is where football's at the moment. Talked about it last year more so than this year at the beginning of the season as well, but it's about turnover football now. A stat that Daniel Hoyne on SEN likes to raise a lot is that 17 of the last 18 flag winners have been top 3 in scores from turnover differential. So top 3 in scores, 17 of the last 18 is a pretty compelling number. Points from defensive half, we've averaged 30 this season. We could only manage 25 in this game. We've conceded, our average is way too high. We're bottom 4 for points from defensive half in the AFL. Our average is 32.5 of our opponents scoring from points from defensive half. No surprise, 48 points the Doggies managed from their defensive half, so well above what's already a too high average. This is the one where really it's sort of, the scores sources. Kick-ins, we gave up 3 goals from kick-ins. And I said to George this morning, added to 1, we got 1 ourselves, which was really rare. It's just about their first all season. So it was 7 points to 18 points. We gave up 3 end-to-end goals, one of which I hope Goody raised this morning in their review of this game, which was an embarrassment, I thought, is that they practiced a set play on us in the last quarter. That stupid full, a torp to the middle, gets out the back to Treloar, was it? Treloar?
Yep.
And then kicked long, 2
up
kicks.
To Poulter.
I thought that is like, they're taking the piss, and
yep.
That was embarrassing. Like, that's the sort of stuff you do. Oh, we've got a set play at training. Let's trial it. And I could see it. You could see it, couldn't you, George? I don't know where you were sitting. I was sitting on the wing, and it was like, oh my god, this is going to get out the back to Treloar because no one was on him.
Yeah.
And sure enough, it did. But what was crazy about these numbers, so centre bounces, they only scored 2 points from centre bounces. We scored 1 point. So the differential, we were only down -1 for centre bounces. So really...
they couldn't kick straight.
They only had 2 points.
They would have had 30 goals if they could kick straight.
Well, not from centre bounces. They only had 2 points.
Yeah.
So they didn't have 0-12. They had 2 points. Only 0 goals, 2 points. So
because
2 points in total.
Yeah, they couldn't kick straight. They should have been a big differential there in any case.
Well, only when you say kick straight, they only had 2 chances, which were 2 points. So they would have only got 12 points if they kicked both of them. But leaving into that aside, the where they didn't kick straight is the stoppage other, but we were plus 12, 6-2-38 from around the ground or non-centre bounce stoppages, 6-2-38 to 3-8-26. So that's where they missed a few. So we were actually plus 12, plus 11 for the game from stoppages. You wouldn't think so, with some of the commentary on Demonland around our stoppage work, but the reality is we were plus 11 from stoppages, and really that's down to the power of work that Max did, and George will talk about the sort of setups a bit later and stuff to overcome that. To be plus 11 for stoppages, centre bounces, around the ground stoppages is pretty amazing, given how easily they seem to sort of dominate those spaces. So I thought that was interesting. But this is where we lost the game in Georgia, and this is where they really could have hurt us even more so. So 3-8, if that was 8-3, they would have won the stoppage count. No worries about that. But this is where the game lost, and this is almost the margin in the game is. So from scores from turnover, as I said, it's 60 to 70% of scores now in AFL footy, and has been the case for the last 3 years, are from turnover. Stoppage is no longer, it hasn't been for a couple of years, but it just isn't really that sort of impactful apart from territory and those things. We scored 2 goals, only scored 2 goals, 13 from turnover, which our season average is 42.5, and that's all about pressure. We could only imagine 13. Again, our season average from scores from turnover is 42.5, and we could only manage 13. You create turnover scores by putting pressure on the opposition and marking or winning the resulting ball, because they're under pressure when they kick. They scored 9 goals, 10. They had 19 scoring shots on turnover, 64. The differential in this game, and I think from memory, off the top of my head, this would be maybe the 4th time this has happened to Melbourne, a plus 50. We were minus 51 points on turnover. Like, that is just bananas. So we're averaging 49.0, which is 16th, or I think there's only 3 teams ahead of us for scores from turnover. Minus 51 differential would be, I think that, it would certainly be one of the highest this round, but it's probably our 3rd or 4th this season. One of them was the Eagles, definitely the first Dockers game, and maybe another one. So maybe it's the 4th time that's happened. We're averaging 42 points from turnover, only 13, and we're conceding 49 on average, but we conceded 64 in this game. And for me, that was the match in a nutshell, like 51 points, 9-10, 19 scoring shots of turnover. If they'd kicked accurately, as you say, George, and that was, say, that was 12-7, it would have been 70 points, 80 points from turnover, and that's just not going to get it done. The last part of the red and blueprint is fitness, but there's a question about fitness, so I won't go into that now. Suffice to say that it's all interconnected. If you're not got the running power that the Dogs displayed, predominantly you cannot, you can't apply the pressure you need to apply, but it also really hurts on turnover, because that transition game is super taxing to get back on defence when you do turn it over and to attack. And one thing I've noticed, and I've talked about this, but the Dogs did this the same. You could tell the sort of writing was on the wall 5 minutes into the game, 10 minutes into the game. Every single team we've played now for weeks. So, there's a stat later on about since round 9, but at least since then, every single single team we've played has got early on in the game a bananas lead in the uncontested possessions and uncontested disposal count. Opposition teams are clearly looking to spread the ground and really exacerbate our lack of run. And that's as much as anything a fitness, a factor. Again, I've talked about this. Fitness is probably the wrong word. Conditioning, where you are in your program and all of that stuff. But teams are clearly going to work on that. That's because every club would know exactly where every other club is at in terms of their program and how best to exploit it. So, statistically, really nothing positive in this game, and a really, really tough watch.
I'll just give a couple of stats for the other side, which were really telling for me. for metres gained in this particular game, the top 7 metres gained for both sides were Bulldogs players before a Melbourne player even was mentioned, which was Tom Sparrow and then Ed Langdon. That's just telling almost 1/3 of their team is moving the ball further than our total team. It's just an incredible number. Usually, most teams, when you're competing, you might have 1 or 2 that kick the equivalent amount as you do, but to have 7 of their players moving the ball further than any of our players is just incredible. The other thing to remember is the Bulldogs played off a 5-day break against Sydney, and they play in the previous game, and that was in Sydney, and the previous game to that was Geelong in Geelong, and they've come out after those 2 hard games and absolutely pantsed us. So the differential I think we saw in this game was one team that's going to be seriously challenging for finals, and the other that definitely won't be.
Yeah, absolutely. A couple of other interesting stats, at least from the Dogs' perspective, is 42 of their 64 points from turnovers were in our front half. Like 6-6-42 from 27 forward half turnovers. So not only were they turning the ball over, they were turning it over in our front half, and lack of care, lack of skill, whatever you want to call it. That's where you want to get your turnovers, in the front half, because obviously it increases your likelihood going to score. And the other one, this must thrill. This stat won't help Melbourne fans much, and it won't help T-Mac's sort of humour either. But 11 of the 12 contested marks that the Doggies took were shared between 𝗟𝗻𝘀𝘁𝗁, Sam Darcy and Tim English. So they combined to take 11 of the Bullies' 12 contested marks, and wouldn't any team love to have those 3 players sort of rolling around their forward line?
Well, if I wasn't suffering from a bad case of MFC as before, I certainly am now. Thank you for that, Bin Man.
My pleasure, Andy.
Let's get into our listener questions. Rhino88 says, surely we must put more focus on clearances. I know Bin Man continues to say they don't matter as much anymore, but the game was basically over at quarter time due to the Bulldogs' clearance dominance. At the break of Gorn says, I don't want to hear from Bin Man how we've evened them up in clearances. They had the luxury of taking Libba off at 3/4 time, and we only won them once the game was gone. Can we all acknowledge now that our midfield is our weakest line? I can't see us winning any more of our remaining games against someone who has a decent midfield. Collingwood is probably our best shot. Spirit of Norm Smith says, clearances are a huge problem. Fremantle smashed us, Dogs smashed us, games being lost early through stoppages and centre clearances, contested footy, that was our strength. Buck Naked asks, are the assistants the problem? Reading between the lines of Goody's presser, it seems that the coaching setup is not working. Is it time for McQualter to walk the plank? Nairobi Demon says, I'm keen for the podcast to discuss Goody's post-match press conference and particularly his theory of why our midfield performed so poorly. He was very unhappy. I increasingly suspect he is dissatisfied with our method, cohesion, and thus coaching in the middle and around stoppages, given he explicitly noted it wasn't about players unavailable, and in the past weeks he has mentioned problems with our stoppage method. So I've got the audio that Nairobi Demon's referring to of Goody's presser, so let's have a listen to it now.
Yeah, it is. And, our clearance game hasn't been anywhere near the level for a period of time now, especially against really dominant midfield groups. We've seen a lack of our ability to win clearance, pressurise the opposition to a level, to get the game back into a scramble, which is really important around contest areas. And it's a big part of our game that we need to work on moving forward. It's a trend in our game that has been a strength over previous years, but this year just hasn't been to the level. And some of that might be personnel, but there's enough personnel there to get it right, and we need to work on it and continue to expose players that are going to deliver in that area of the ground for us. So it's something we need to get on top of.
Do you have a theory? I know you sort of touched on it a little bit, but can you give us any insight into it? I know you can't say too much.
Yeah, I've got a theory, but I don't really want to put it out here tonight. talk about it and work with it with the coaches. But we need to get that part of our game better. It's nowhere near the level. To lose 10 clearances in a row, you're giving up a lot of territory on the back of that, and that puts you under enormous pressure. So we acknowledge it. We put our hand up that that's not to any level, and we need to get it better.
Now, George, I know you've got some thoughts on our once vaunted and feared midfield, which now seems to be quite inept and impotent. Is it personnel? Is it coaching? What's happening?
There's certainly an element of personnel without people like Petrarca there for a start, but also remember, and we've got an injured Oliver, and sad to say this, guys, but Jack Viney is getting old and is not what he was 3-5 years ago, for example. So that's part of it. Particularly in this game, I spoke about it last week, the setups are just awful to watch, just awful. I'd invite everybody to have a look at the very first bounce in the replay in this game. We had no one in the centre bounce behind Max Gawn. Absolutely no one. Guess what happened? The ball goes into space, and of course Bontempelli covers the space better than anybody else. He finishes getting the ball out, I think, to Treloar, and off they go. Clearances aren't everything. It's the quality of the clearances that you're getting. But if you're giving the opposition so much space, then they exploit it, as the Dogs did in this game. There's a reason why they got so much metres gained in this game. It's because they weren't being pressured, and they're absolutely exploiting us. Now, the other thing that I noticed that you won't see on the replay, I think it was in the third quarter, once again, we had no one behind Max. And the closest players were both Footscray players behind on that half of the ground. They just waltzed the ball straight out of the middle, absolutely waltzed it out, and of course went straight down to Ugel-Hagan once again, if I remember. What was interesting was that Neal-Bullen came from the half-forward line because they were watching this and went up to Max in the middle, held his arms out wide alongside to explain to Max, obviously, Max, you can't leave half the centre circle with no Melbourne players in it. That sort of stuff indicates to me that the coaching staff are either not getting the message through, they're not coaching the people correctly, or the players who are in the centre aren't following the instructions that are being given. But given that this was happening, at least for the first 3 quarters of the game, I think the problem is the coaching. So I don't know what to do. I think Goody's alluded to it without saying that he's got serious doubts about what's being done in the middle, and we saw the effects of it in this game.
Just a couple of comments on that, George. One of the things that was really striking at the 𝗙cie game, and just a reminder, it really is great to see footy that close up. And Winton Oval looks a treat. They've done a great job. The surface looks fantastic, as I said, but one of the real features that really just stood out was how often our setups were poor. So I couldn't even tell you who was on ball for most of the time for the D's. Laurie was a bit, and was it Laurie?
Laurie would be, and Seston and White, no doubt.
But so I wasn't really looking at who was at stoppages, but I can't count the number of times that we lost stoppages or scrambled sort of contest footy, and they just fed the ball out the back to a free Doggies player. Like, it was, at one point I was screaming at him, like, get on the player right behind, like he's all by himself. And they were either tapping it back. They were their ruckman was killing ours. I don't even know who their ruckman was, but they were either winning it clean and getting it out the back to a free player, or more concerningly is when there was a contest, so therefore a little bit of time to man up, there was so often a free Doggies player out on the defensive side of the clearance that they were just feeding it back out. There was no one on them, and bang, away they go. That was like the trigger for their turnover game in that 𝗙cie game. So just the other comment, though, is I'm not a huge fan of Goody. Like, his inference is pretty clear, isn't it? So he's talking about the coaching setup, and I think you mentioned that last week and perhaps another couple of times, George, around, that it's easy to criticise the players. We've also got a lot of players who are new to the midfield, so it's if you're not it's a bit like being if you're a forward and being asked to defend. It's not a natural thing to go in and know all of the setups, but that's on the coaches to get them right. But the implication from Goody was that they need to do some work around the coaching and the setup, and I'm not a big fan of that being aired at presser. Like, Goody was guilty of that, I thought, a couple of times early on in his career when he was under pressure, getting a bit, sort of under the bus type vibe. And he did the same thing with Fullerton. That I mentioned it a few weeks ago when Fullerton wasn't selected, who, by the by, Goody was spot on. I think Goody's spot on in both things, so maybe I'm being a bit unfair. We want honesty at presses, and I'm knocking him for being honest, but I don't know. I don't know what
maybe
you guys
he was
think about that.
maybe in this instance he was protecting the players.
Possibly.
That, he didn't, But then again, he wasn't, because he was saying it's not the. I don't know. Maybe he was.
Well, I'm not
maybe
sure.
He was having
I agree with
dig at the coaches,
so maybe I'm being it's a bit sort of hypocritical to ask for to it when the players and the coach are honest.
But look, I was sort of last week prepared to give McQualter a bit of a pass, considering the situation with a lot of our players, with track, with losing Brayshaw, with the Clary situation and not being fully fit, having a full pre-season under his belt. And I might still be willing to give that, but it sounds like that if Goody is if the inference that Goody was making that it is the coaching, well, maybe there's trouble in paradise.
The reality is we lost the Giants game because we gave up 8 clearances at the beginning, 8 unanswered centre clearances at the beginning of the fourth quarter, and we gave up 10 in this quarter. So 18 in that can't just be on the players, can it? It's got to be a setups and structure.
That's the question. All right. Well, good. Let's talk about more of Goody on match day. Nairobi Demon wants to know, for those of the game and who regularly watch the players box, do you think Goody is conferring directly with the young stats chap on the bench more than in the past? In the past few games, I've noticed on TV him more regularly looking at the computer. It could be the cameras are covering this more because we're not performing as well as in the past, but I also wonder whether he's not getting the analysis he needs from the coach's box. So, B-Man, you've usually got your binoculars trained on the bench, although this is probably something that the watchers on TV, like Nairobi Demon, are more likely to notice. Do you think Goody's conferring with the stats people rather than his assistants on match days? Is this something you've noticed either at the matches or when you've watched the replay on TV?
Well, you've obviously not been listening to me, Andy. I feel quite hurt, but I did actually raise this about a month ago. And when Pearl first decided that he's not a huge fan of the stats file, I did raise...
Still listens every week, though, so like something.
I did raise the point that how significant stats and data is to the coaches. And I said on that in that podcast, I said, next time you watch a game, look how often the cameras go to Goody at the bench and he's talking to that fella, looking at the data. So maybe they're looking at a dating site, I don't know, but I presume they're looking at a data, the stats. And so the short answer to Nairobi Demon is no. Goody is all, huge. He's huge data. And like when you look at the board, as I said, that they take out to the players, they've got 5 key metrics always. They've got data, always got pressure rating on there. They 100% look at it. But the second part of that question, I think, goes to what we're talking about with McWalter, and his also role is up in the box, isn't it? And I think that, Goody, he coaches on the bench, and so his assistants coach. I think that relationship with whoever's in the box up the top and feeding information, you might remember it seemingly took a little while for 𝗍𝗍 and him to get that good relationship going. But, I do wonder about that. He does rely on information from the box, obviously, because they've got the full ground view. The short answer is no. I think that's about the normal amount that Goody looks for the young fella and his data.
Spirit of Norm Smith asks, what is our new style of play? It's become boring at times compared to the Dogs, for example. The Dogs went fast, direct, waves, running in waves. Ds were slow, indirect, wide, static. Though when we do go more direct, it's actually positive and leads to goals. Surprise, surprise. So I actually wholeheartedly agree that our ball movement is stagnant and slow. It's frustrating and ineffective in comparison to the teams that we've played in the past couple of weeks who all were moving the ball fairly quickly and with precision. It resulted in high scoring in the majority of those games. And George, are you obviously frustrated as I am with our ball movement?
The ball movement comes as a result of a couple of factors. The people who are trying to move the ball for a start, and I don't think we've got our top selections playing at the moment. Got a lot of our the few good, decent kicks, for example, in the side are just not in the side. But the other thing comes down to what we'll talk about very shortly, and that's fitness. Yeah. If you look really good when you're running out and leaving your opponent trailing behind because you're fitter than them. And at the moment, we're not as fit. We saw it particularly in this game. And like I said, you've really got to admire the Bulldogs having come off 2 hard games and a 5-day break. They were just leaving us in their dust. We're just not fit enough for whatever reason. Don't want to talk about it further because we'll discuss it very shortly. So we'll get back to that.
Yep, we will talk about that soon. So let's move on to the next point. Spirit Norm Smith says that our tackling is ineffective. We're letting players get handballs away to keep the ball moving. Certainly obvious last night and the prior few weeks versus Freo and GWS. The bin man, it's glaringly obvious that our tackling is ineffective. Opposition players, they either break the tackles easily or are able to get handballs off. And conversely, and this is just my opinion, I think we get tackled too easily and we can't seem to break them. Is this something you're concerned with?
I mean, it's just in the mix with other things, and I hate, I don't want to sheet everything home to sort of conditioning and stuff, but that's what happens if your strength isn't the same as the opposition and up and about. Is there a technique thing there? I don't know. Like some of the teams have got really skilled at getting their arms above the tackle and getting it released. I have to say though, in terms of tackling, that I don't know what Oliver needs to do to get a free kick, but he's not going to get one this season for his tackling. It is really frustrating. It's a huge factor, isn't it, when teams break through tackles? Because as soon as they're through, all of their, they've got teammates. Every team who's running hard at the moment have got teammates ahead of the ball, and once they get through that line, they've got multiple players free. Mm-hmm. It's like, and their teams are backing themselves in to break tackles against us. It happened in the 𝗙cie game too. They we just couldn't. We didn't seem like we're in for the fight. I think that's where just sort of pressure gauge and contest. It's a sort of essential. Having said all of that, we did have whatever it was. We had more tackles than them on the night. I think there is a stat. Not that average punters are allowed to get hold of it, but there's a breaking tackle stat, and so it would in many ways be more useful than total tackles, because a tackle is it's not much good if it doesn't actually stop the opposition.
Stick, yeah. All right, Spirit, this is
just as an added extra, Andy, we should be very good at tackling, because I don't know whether either of you have seen it.
I have.
But
Max
Andy,
you're going to say.
Max, with Max 𝗍cie, yeah, Max Jack's brother is Taekwondo expert, and he did a fabulous session with the girls. You'd think that at least the equivalent
does do some stuff with the guys.
I would hope so, yeah. but what really impressed me with that was the way that he's not built like Jack, but the way that he is able to use his body and teach people how to use their body to tackle effectively. So yeah, it'd be a bit of a worry if we're not utilising him for the men as well. But
I know that certain players were doing sort of extracurricular stuff with him, but then I think I saw a video that Melbourne put on, something that he did with the boys, or at least some of them. So I'd hope we're utilising that, but then again, it's a worry if we have been doing it and it's not working. But maybe it's something like sometimes you just can't fix the technique of players who, with kicking, once they've been ingrained in learning, and maybe you can't teach players to tackle properly. They just revert back to what they know. Spirit, this is also going to, I'm sure I'm going to ask you in a sec, George, about this, and you're going to say, well, let's talk about it when we talk about conditioning. This is about defence. Spirited Norm Smith says, rock solid defence? Not anymore. Freo and the Dogs had a party. Giants kick goals in bursts. Lever and McDonald are leaking goals. Not sure they are agile enough anymore. Lever especially is having a bad year. He has lost athleticism and struggles now with a one-on-one contest. I think he always struggled with that. And his loose handball was horrible. McDonald cost us 2 goals in the first quarter. So, Georgia, is our defence just solely to blame, or is it a fact the ball is just coming in so fast and so easily under zero pressure for our defence to be as effective as it once was?
I think you've hit the nail right on the head there. You know, no defence in the league for any team can face the onslaught that was coming, you know, particularly in this game, and has been for the last couple of weeks. When the ball's moving freely, and what every team wants to do is move the ball quickly, efficiently, so that the defence can't set up.
It's a pressure on the last king inside 50 is we're just not applying it, and so what we did in this match.
That's correct. Yeah, absolutely correct. You cannot blame the defenders. There's nothing any defender can do if the ball is unhindered coming into that 50-metre mark, because the forward leads out and he gets hit straight on the chest. It's nice and easy for them. In this game, it was just time and time again. Don't blame the defenders. It was exacerbated, of course, when Stephen May went off. The structures start to fall apart. We moved Tommy Mack up forward. We moved Petty back. We're just changing chairs on the Titanic, quite literally, in this particular game. But if you want a solid defence, you've got to have players who know how to work with it. We've talked about this time and time again. Players who work with each other every single week. Salo's not there. Bowie's been in and out. We had Howes come in this week for his first game. It's not surprising that Lever's being beaten one-on-one. He's not a one-on-one player. He's the guy who comes in as the third man up, does the intercept or does the spoil when it's needed. But just if your structures have fallen apart, it comes down to one-on-one situations. So you finish up with Tommy Mack having to fight one-on-one, Lever having to fight one-on-one. It doesn't work when you've got a team in a zone type defence. We're going to struggle without Stephen May there as the Rock of Gibraltar in our defence in the coming weeks as well. So it's not just the defenders; it's the guys up the ground have got to do the work to make it easy.
Yeah, I mean, even with Omac in the team, we would have struggled to defend that. So, but the other thing too, I think, just you talk about deck chairs on the Titanic, but just stretching the chairs analogy, in a way, I feel like we're caught between two stools with our defensive system. For so many years, that unit had a system, that relied on us applying pressure to the ball, the last kick inside 50, and then you can see by our intercept marks numbers, that wasn't working because we weren't applying pressure. But I just feel like that, particularly Stevie and Lever, and the others, that system that they played with, and it was so effective. They've been asked to retool and play, also have this transition turnover game, and they're sort of half stuck between these two models. But the point is, the key one that you make, George, is defenders are, Goody talks about that 3 phases of the game is defence is an all-team thing. And if the rest of the team aren't pulling their weight, you can't really, give it to the defenders. Having said that, I really don't like T-Mac one-on-one, because I reckon it's never been his strength, is it, one-on-one, and same for Lever. And so you make a good point about, the fact that in a way we force them to play one-on-one if we're not playing pressure, and they expose us. They've got some pretty good players up forward too. So it's it's probably a bit unfair to knock T-Mac for some of those kicks. Were spot on. They were kicked to the forward's advantage, and they took full advantage. And again, lucky that they were inaccurate.
Well, let's get into the conditioning and fitness. Radish D says, looking at some of the stats for some answers, I came across our points conceded as interesting. In 2021, we allowed 80 points or more on 3 occasions and lost all 3. In 2022, it was 8 times and we lost 7 of 8, beating the Hawks 91-81. After the winning streak was broken in 2022, the scores conceded were really inconsistent, with it seesawing back and forth every week. In 2023, we also conceded 8 scores of 80 or more, but only lost 3 of those. Hence, the forward line becomes the issue because we lost a lot of games not conceding a big score. This year, in only 20 games rather than 24 or 25 in the previous years, we have conceded 10 scores of 80 or more and lost 9 of those 10s. Port being the exception. What's clear is that our defence is significantly worse this year, especially since the middle of the season. So what's changed? I put it down to 3 things: personnel, game plan and conditioning. So which is the main culprit? Conditioning to me is the main issue. We look slow. We're second to the contest and also getting cut up on the outside, meaning that our players are getting stuck in the middle. The zone isn't working as well as it has previously, and we're much easier to open up than in previous years. When we think about it, this makes sense. Our teams in the last few weeks have been young. Young players haven't developed their tank yet. But on the other side, we also play a lot of older players. Gawn, Melksham, McDonald, May and Viney all playing recently and over 30. So we have a fairly stacked team of late, with about half the team, 11-ish by my count, either 18 to 21 or 30 plus. It doesn't make for the fittest group on the park. Can we improve this next year? I think we can. The pre-season was very compromised, as has been much discussed. With an extra few weeks break and the chance to come back with a full list, I think 2025 looks all right. And Lazy adds, what has happened to our fitness levels? We've gone from being one of the fittest teams in the comp to looking terribly unfit, we struggled to cover the ground at Marvel. The defence is under pressure all the time, and there doesn't seem to be enough chasing back by the midfield to help. As for now to the end of the season, I'd like to see McVie, Laurie, Pickett, Woden and maybe Tolstrup getting serious midfield minutes. I'd like to see AMW and possibly Kynan Brown get more time down back. Spirit of Norm Smith agrees, saying, we were a strong fit team in 2021 under Burgess, running games through and winning second half contests. Unfortunately, we are falling short in fourth quarters, even goalless in some recent games. Lots of hands on hips and tired MFC players. Chasing gets exhausting when others are winning contests. Not sure if it's conditioning or the fact that when you chase or are beaten at a clearance, defending wears you down. So, B-Man, what are your thoughts on our conditioning and fitness now that we are well out of any loading phases?
Yeah, so good questions, and I won't repeat because Radish D's question and his comments is basically spot on where I've landed on it. The sort of critical question in there that he raises is, to what extent where do you put it? Or where do you factor in? Is it, he mentions, so what's Shade? It put it down to 3 things: personnel, what's the issue? Personnel, game plan and conditioning, which is the main culprit. I agree with Radish D that conditioning is the main sort of factor, main issue, which it's not the only factor, and it doesn't mean there aren't issues with personnel, or it doesn't mean there aren't issues with game plan. I think we've definitely struggled with our game plan to do what I think, for me, this season feels very much like 2019 in some respects, where in 2019 we had multiple postseason surgeries. You might remember, I think 6 or something after our unexpectedly deep run into the finals. We had a shocking interrupted preseason. We never really got going that season, and Goody took the opportunity to retool and develop the method and game plan that won us the flag in 21. Feels a little bit similar this year in terms of, the number of players interrupted preseasons. I mentioned last week the golden rule of 90% of your list doing 90% of the sessions. I'd love to know where we're at. They sometimes, a few years ago, clubs routinely talked about that number. They never do anymore. But before I go on, because there's some other comments, can you play that clip for me, Andy?
Look, I know what I told you to do, but when I told you to do that, I was... Ralph, I was not exactly right. What do you mean not right? I mean not right. I don't get you. You mean you were wrong? Yeah, that's right, Malf. I was what you just said I was just then, yeah. Wrong? The Fawn's wrong? Malf, look. There is a first time for everything, huh?
The Demonland podcast is filmed in front of a live studio audience.
Live audience. Thanks, Andy. And so I was not right. I was not right about expecting or prophesising or predicting that Melbourne would come out of that bye period and we'd be playing our best footy in August. Our first opportunity to play a game in August was our worst game all season. I was not right about, that we would be looking to run and cover more ground and be back to our dynamic best come this last part of the season where all clubs really want to be at where the Dogs are at. So I was not right about those things. In my own defence, I'd say that the point I made about 6 weeks ago is when I made that prediction and when I talked about it was that we're either it's all part of the plan and things are in order and looking how that program should look like, or it's not, and we never got to the level we needed to do in the preseason. And as I said at that time, if the latter is the case, we're toast. And I fear that the latter. I think the evidence is pretty clear that the latter is the case. I was talking about this today. That I think in 21 we had a huge advantage over the opposition, over every other team. We were the fittest team in the AFL by some margin. Fit at the right time of the year. We had our list pretty much, in the best possible shape we could be. We didn't have many injuries coming into that final series, and we played like a team that had a distinct advantage. It seems to me that every club in the competition is now at a higher level of conditioning that they were even only 3 seasons ago. So we've lost our comparative advantage. Even at our best, even if we were as fit as we have been, we'd lost our comparative advantage over other teams, which has definitely brought us back to the pack. What I would say is, something I've been talking about for a while, is the game is really changing remarkably. I would love for the media to have a greater emphasis on this aspect of the game. You are now, I mentioned 400 metres runners today when I was talking to George about this, and he said more akin to 800 metre runners. When watching the Olympics, I think it's a good thing. It's a good analogy. So 23 800 metre runners, the game has become so ballistic in terms of their aerobic running. You need to be elite runners, otherwise you can't spread, you can't do you can't cover, and that was really evident. That's what I mean by teams are clearly going to work on us and looking to exploit that run. All the clubs would know where every other club's at. They'd all have their own metrics and way of knowing that information, which all leads to the interesting conversation about, I think once you start opening up the conversation about conditioning program, is the next logical conversation is where you have just a proper discussion about the program. I mean, there's a lot of talk about Burgess, and about the losing him was an issue, but I think there's some really legitimate questions to be asked about. Look at Adelaide, Burgess. Is there a shelf life of this model of flog them to death? Like Melbourne players consistently talk. I've heard this probably at least a dozen times, Melbourne players saying we train harder than every other team in the competition, but the evidence is now piling up is that we're struggling to be at our peak come finals. Does that model of playing through pain and resilience, and is it got a limited time in which it can work? I don't know the answers to that. What I would say is it's really impossible without the right information to make an informed assessment of the conditioning team, in part because there's no meaningful analysis of it in the media, and there's no metrics at which to do it. But, so to be fully transparent and fair to Selwyn, we don't know. We don't have that information. We also don't know, we know the reality of what I've talked about, a list that is no longer 44, it's 42. We know that that athletically players incrementally improve their aerobic and strength year on year. That's true of all elite athletes, which is why in 800 meter runners is that there are very few 21, 20, 22-year-olds in the ranks of the elite runners. For men, it's all in the 28, 29, 30. That's the same for footballers, is, the multiple 6, 7, 8 pre-seasons under their belt. We've got a lot of young players playing in their second or third pre-season, playing in the seniors, all of the interrupted pre-season. So it's really hard to make a sort of reason, sort of analysis of where they're at. But it's definitely, I think it's a reasonable conversation and question to ask about, is our conditioning up to it? Interested in your thoughts on that, George?
I think things have changed too quickly. Very quickly for to make alterations halfway through the season. I think the classic example was Port versus Sydney this week. Now, while Sydney were missing 4 or 5 good players out of the side, that didn't explain a 100-point loss. It was just dramatic for a team that's taking everything beforehand.
Not scoring a goal just before half time.
It was just incredible. And in this case, I think Sydney have a good opportunity because they're a game and a huge amount of percentage ahead of second place in any case. So they're not, and certainly third. They're not going to lose anything.
You've got a home final locked in.
Yeah, absolutely. And but I think a lot of clubs this year, for next year in particular, will be looking at how they've previously conditioned players compared to what's required these days with the smaller list. 24 games, is the disadvantage of training through pain actually greater than the advantages that you might get by giving people a rest? Geelong were able to do that a couple of years ago. And got them a grand
and
final.
And this year they did the same thing this year. And have been doing the same thing this year.
Got them a premiership because they were able to. So I think there will be a lot of intellectual property for the conditioning staff. Trying to be poached from others or looking at the experiences of others. Certainly in 2021, Burgess was the bee's knees of conditioning. I don't think that's the case now.
And Adelaide have been struggling.
They
haven't. Although they've come good with their run a bit near the end of the season, but they took a long time to get going in that space.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting. I'm not being critical of Binman's loading theories because I think that was genuine, but I think that might change. When teams can and choose to do that.
Here's one for the close your ears if you don't like the L word, but that Swans game is, for me, like the frustrating thing is I haven't listened to any of the media, so I don't know if this has been discussed in the media. But for me, that's like an historically sort of outlier, that result. A team on top of the ladder near the end of a home and away season. I think the last time a team's been beaten in the similar or analogous situation is Carlton in 1945. And I don't know what how the sort of footy commentator's commentary have tried to work out what's happening. But for me, the obvious thing is that they're taking advantage of the fact that they've got already a home final locked in and they've been flogging them on the track and they've been loading them because they couldn't cover the ground. They simply couldn't cover the ground. No. You can't cover the ground, and Port could. That's what happens in modern footy. And to me, as I've talked about a number of times over the last sort of 6 or 7 weeks, is it explains it's a big factor in all of these really anomalous results. I'm going to have a look and see if I can drill in, but I am positive that this year there has been a huge, almost sort of I won't be surprised if it's the biggest ever in terms of teams against the betting line, in terms of making their line or not making the line. Because some of the results of strong clubs getting beaten by 10, 15 goals is just, I don't think it's happened before. And that was an extraordinary result. And from a punting perspective, that Swans are great value now. They're out to $6.75 for the flag purely because of that result. But I think that they're getting themselves in shape for a proper tilt at the finals, and that was a huge factor in that loss. Of course, not the only factor. A whole bunch of other factors as well. That defensively are suspect, but so are Port. Port are defensively even more suspect than the Swans. So 148 to what was 148 to 36. That cannot be explained by injuries, personnel, game plan, not solely. Of course, those things are factors, but if anyone analysing that game ignores the likelihood that load management was part of it, is going to come up with the wrong diagnosis of what happened.
Just some stats on Sydney. Sort of asked, so the worst form from the team on top of the ladder since 1990. So this is number of wins from the last X amount of games. So to 0-2, 14 since 1990. Top teams have done that 14 times, gone 0-2, including the Swans this year. 0-3, only the Swans this year. 1-4 has happened 8 times to teams on top of the ladder, including this. Obviously, all of these include the Swans.
They've lost 4 of their last 5, haven't they?
Yes, I'll get to that. One out of 5, 3 times has happened since 1990 to a team on top of the ladder. So 1 in 5 games, and now the only team to have won 1 in 6 is the Swans as a team on top of the ladder. 2 in 7, Swans are the only team, and 3 out of 8. 3 out of the last 8, which is what
old school logic would say the Swans are toast. They've got no chance. They're gone.
That's not it. 4 out of 9, 2 times, including the Swans this year, and 5 out of 10, 5 times. Remarkably, the top teams since 1990 have 5 out of 10 games. It's happened 5 times, including the Swans this year.
And I reckon they'll win the flag.
Yeah.
Despite those numbers.
Someone said, update to see if any of the historical examples went on to win the flag. So of teams that went 0-2, which is obviously has happened. Collingwood in 23 won the premiership, and then Essendon in 01, St Kilda 09, and Adelaide 17 made the grand final, so didn't win. 1 in 4, Collingwood won in 1 out of 4. Collingwood won in 23.
That was last year,
but
wasn't
no
it?
one else in any of those
Same
situations since 1990 have won the flag.
Yeah, but that's really interesting you raise Collingwood, because remember Collingwood, everyone was writing them off this time last year because they went through that patch as well. And
they had
went
1
on
in
to win the flag.
4, yeah.
Yeah.
And listeners, Bin Man has predicted the premiers for this year, so will we play the 𝗠𝗲𝗱𝗶𝗃 tape again?
Well, that's it. Yeah, well, how about this? At $6.75, they are brilliant value.
What a Brisbane.
Their favourites, $3.25. They're not good value.
No, okay, fair enough.
They're under the true odds.
All right, let's move on. So Jabroni says since round 9, so you alluded to this stat before, Bin Man. So since round 9, we've won 4, lost 8. Our stats are the following: 15th in disposals, 16th kicking efficiency, 18th in clearances, 14th points for points for and against. Is this a talent, a coaching issue, or a combination of both? A discussion on these numbers would be appreciated. The stats come from the round so far on the AFL site. So, Georgia, the statistics are damning, and it's no wonder we're in the position we're in, given how poor those stats are since round 9.
I'm doing the stats section now, am I? This is remarkable.
Give man a break. I'm sure he'll chime in.
To ensure that, just to check whether you are the Pearl or not, actually.
Yeah. Let's see how you go,
You've been coming up with the numbers. A few.
but the Pearl had a crack at me this week. So
yeah, well, that of course, because you want to, he
was complimenting you. He said you're right. He just was the tone Andy used.
That's right.
Look, all of those, I think in this case, all of those stats are quite simply as a result of a team that is not playing well at the moment. Yep. It's not unsurprising that all of those numbers are in that sort of areas. You know, we've won a couple of games against bottom level sides in the second half of the season. When you come up against a good level side, as we saw this week, that's the difference between us and the top 4 at the moment. So. Just not surprising. The numbers reflect exactly where we're at.
And I want to invent a stat, and it's called the dynamic stat. Is that we just, watching the Dogs, both the 𝗚cie team, the VFL team and the AFL team, back to back, they were just so much more dynamic than us, weren't they? And I mean, that's what we loved about the D's when we're up and about in playing our best footy, how dynamic we are. And so, yeah, that we would be 18th for dynamic. I can't even say it, for dynamic.
Dynamism.
I shouldn't come up with stats I can't pronounce.
That's right.
We're 18th in dynamic.
Yeah. And as a good comparison, go back to the 21 year for us. Look at the kids who were playing at 𝗚cie who didn't make the team, and not even just the kids. We had people like Nathan Jones, James Jordan, Vandenberg, all those sort of players were playing damn good football and couldn't make the side, but they were still playing at 𝗚𝗚𝗃𝗃 and putting it out there every single week. We don't see that at the moment.
There you go. That was what Pearl said. You would say so. There you go. Lefty says, I would complain about the terrible umpiring, but we have much bigger problems than that. So while the umps could not have saved us in this match, and yes, we have much bigger problems, much bigger issues. I thought the umpiring was woeful again. B-Man, we don't need to dwell on this too much, but do you still have any rant left in you about the state of umpiring in the AFL?
No, I'm all rounded out on all levels, on all. But the umpiring, the umpiring just felt like one of those sort of existential jokes, where I couldn't care less about. Yeah. It was like, but what was getting my goat, I have to say, is it always drives me nuts. Is the Doggies fans going, a ball or whatever? It's like, give me a spell. I could not believe. That's the first time I've sat down on a bottom level, apart from a VFL game, for a long time, and I dislike it because, I was underneath the overhang at Marvel, and I always feel like I'm in a sort of, I don't know, like a bloody coffin or something. So that was probably another bad. And I lost my bloody best Demons cap on the way between the Whitten Oval game and the Marvel game. It was a disastrous night, all things considered, but I could not believe how often Gawn got manhandled in the ruck. And I don't know whether this happens week in, week out, but it was really interesting watching it close, is also how often they start blocking him way before the ball, even before the ball's kicked. And Maxi was really losing his that's the most animated I've seen him for a while at the umpires, not like I've seen him animated at other opponents or whatever. But he spent half the game putting his arms up to the umpires going, well, what do you need to do to give me a free kick? So, to be honest, I didn't even notice the umpiring beyond that, apart from the fact of, oh, my God, just some of the decisions, like not holding the ball. And it was the least of my concerns, I have to say.
Yes. Bigfoot says, now that finals are out of reach, do we bite the bullet and play whatever kids we have in the twos and give them a taste of seniors before next season? Surely we have to salvage something out of this season for next season and finish as low as possible to get a better draft hand and fixture in 2025. 𝗍𝗶𝘀𝘁𝗃, like a Sunday morning, says, G'day, fellas. Thanks again for this brilliant podcast. I love the insights and the banter. I think I'll pour myself a beer on Monday night and imagine we're all drowning our sorrows together. In all seriousness, I still love the club and love Goody. I just think we're cooked. I was unfortunately not able to get to the game, so I was watching the replay, and at one point Richo and BT were acknowledging our young list and the fact that we've had to rebuild on the run, balancing current match outcomes with future-proofing our side. They mentioned Geelong and Sydney as teams who've successfully done this, the inference being that we've somehow fudged it up. I don't know enough about the Cats or the Swans to know if this is a fair comparison, but would love your thoughts. Have we somehow made strategic blunders in the way we've introduced our younger guys to the game, or has our hand been totally forced by injury, and is this an unfair comparison? If you can validate my dislike of BT's commentary, I'd appreciate it. Cheers. Thanks, guys. Love your work and looking forward to Monday. Monocular says, some say play all the kids now, but if they are all thrown in the deep end at once, will that really help? Sure, the likes of K. Brown, Woden, Howes should get more exposure and maybe even Seston at some stage, but Jefferson, whilst tempting, could have his development curtailed unless introduced carefully. Has Laurie had the line put through already, despite his contractual status? I feel being dropped after his best game was saying something. Is there data on how many under-22s we have used in 2024 compared to other sides? It seems as a gut feeling we have more than other sides, and most appear to have a huge upside, giving me cause for genuine optimism going forward. Given our terrible run of injuries to many key players pre and during the season, and one suspended indefinitely, put us on the back foot all year. Can things get worse? MFC SS kicking in. We desperately need a clear run of injury from the start. Brayshaw, Petracca, Oliver, Viney, and they were our best mids. Petty and Melksham half the season. Bowie, May, Spargo, who essentially missed the whole season. Then Windsor to ice the cake. And as the season seems shot, some who need a rest to get ready for a pre-season should be considered now. If we can start this season with a full list, of those who will be able to play most of 2025, we'll be in a far better shape. I personally don't see us bottoming out. So, George, I know you have questions on our depth, but do you think we should play the kids and test out that depth in the remaining couple of games?
I'll start off by asking Bin Man, did you see anything at Footscray at the Whitten Oval that will be justified playing in the AFL side?
This feels like loaded question, you tricky bugger, you. I was, as I said at the top, no is the answer. I know that Jefferson kicked 4 goals, and so that's his job, kicking goals as a forward, it was good that he took his chances. But there were some pretty poor defensive efforts from him, I thought, both from whether it's not knowing about where to run to in the right spots, or more concerningly, just effort, really. That was my knock. There wasn't really anyone who stood out from, the players I focused on in the game. I really kept a close eye on Jefferson. I really kept a close eye on Fullerton. I really kept a close eye on Varel. I think Varel looks like he's got good craft, and I'm relatively confident. It's a bit hard to tell with big guys, but he'll get there. But he doesn't look fit enough. He was gassed. Fullerton isn't really a ruckman, so maybe he can be that sort of forward. Give the ruckman a chop out. I don't know. I really think Lobb was the player we needed. Like, he was the player that we should have got, I reckon. But he looks a miles off in terms of having an AFL ready body for it. And he doesn't look strong enough. Like, he's not sort of imposing in his chest, or, compare him to someone like who's the same age as Phil Thorpe for I know he's been off and doing weights and whatever, but and the other player and Jefferson was the other one. And so I thought, probably maybe that's a bit harsh given Jefferson kicked 4 goals, but his defensive work and want for follow second, third, fourth efforts just wasn't there. And the other player I did have a little bit of a watch on, sort of with the thought of whether he might get selected at some point, is Seston, and he didn't really do anything that sort of jumped off the page for me. That no,
yeah,
question.
And the other reality that we're now facing is that of all the trades that we've made since 2021, not a single one of those players is playing at AFL level. These were the players that should have been holding up, when we got injuries, or filling the gaps till the younger players develop sufficiently to be able to come through.
Who are they?
They're all
Hunter.
Hunter.
Well, Hunter was
Hunter. Shaggy.
Yep.
Grundy.
Yep.
McAdam.
Yep.
Fullerton
and Billings.
and Billings are all playing at 𝗚cie instead of senior games. None of them are pushing for a senior selection, except for Grundy. Of course, he's not here anymore.
And the issue with that, George, is that those senior players are the ones who are going to give our young players like Windsor a chop out. Maybe Windsor would have been rested that week. He gets injured with a syndesmosis rather than. Funnily enough, the one player actually of that list, in fact, I do give props for, and I quite like it, that is Shaki down back. His attack on the ball was really good, and I thought his reading of the play was pretty good too. So, funnily enough, I would just about think of him as a defender.
But the trouble is, the question was asked about the young ones, and we honestly, guys, we don't have the talent. When you win a premiership, you don't get decent draft picks. Well, those draft picks are now coming through. The top quality players are found at the top of the draft. We haven't had that. We've seen it with Windsor, how good he is at number 6. We're probably going to see the same with Colt. But the rest of the players who we've got playing as young players are down at 𝗚cie. They just you don't get the quality. It's as simple as that. And the other thing, I saw a really...
Watch it still out on Jefferson. He was a high pick too. What pick was he? He was 13,
14. 14. Yeah.
The first rounder. So that's...
I saw an interesting number the other day, which was how long it takes the number 1 to 5 draft pick to play 20 games. It was 2.7 years that you get a good draft pick. He doesn't change anything for nearly 3 years in the competition. You can see that with Harley Reid at West Coast. Hasn't changed anything for West Coast. He's a great player, and you won't see his best for probably another 12 months or so.
Yeah, 2-3 years.
If you want good players to come through, they've got to be top draft picks.
And there's heaps of data too. There's that data set that's really interesting, about the number of games.
Yep.
It really is a diminishing return once as you go down from pick 1 through, in terms of the number of pick 1s who get to 150 games, for instance, as opposed to pick 20. I mean, I guess it's fairly logical, but there is a bit of a myth about the sort of diamond in the rough. Pick 30 or whatever. We've had a few of them, but then of course you're always going to have some misses, aren't you?
Yeah. The other question that we're answering, when you look at the Cats and the Swans, the Swans have benefited. They've been able to pad out their list very successfully through their academy. And previously their cost of living allowance, which was taken away from, unfortunately, but also their trading. They've brought in the players like Grundy and Jordan, which have slotted straight into their side. The Cats have had an excellent run with father-sons over the years, but also their trading's been good. They brought in Cameron, Stingle, Oliver Henry. These are the guys who are filling the gaps that enable the younger players to develop properly around them. So, our trading's just let us down badly since the premiership, and we're paying the cost for it.
Yeah, I mean, we'll have a good spirited debate about that after the seasons, because I think that's a little unfair on the trading, but that's for after the season. But the Cats and the Swans are a really interesting example, because I would counter, in fact, the opposite is true. One of the problems for the Cats that Scott looked to address in 21, when they were 22, when they won the flag, was to go hard. And he famously said, "We are prepared to risk missing the 8 by going hard in the middle during the bye period to maximise where we're at conditioning-wise come finals." And it won them the flag, because every other year from Scott's first flag is their perennial underperformers come finals. So, yes, they were up and about for, 8-9 years, but couldn't crack it for a flag win, and he was prepared to take that risk. And what's really, really interesting as it relates to Melbourne is they missed the finals the next year. They missed the finals the next year after going hard for that 1 year, and they missed the finals in 23. Collingwood, a good chance of missing the finals this year after winning the flag last year. And Swans are another good example. Is that when was their flag? Their flag was, how long ago was their last flag?
2012, I think.
2012. So we're 12 years. If you go on Demonland and see the narrative about Goody, imagine if Goody was their coach in terms of horse, like how long it's been since they've won a flag. So it depends what you mean by success. Like 12 years without a flag is a long bloody time without a flag with a team that's got the sort of advantages they've got. They've not been successful, really at all. So it depends what the sort of question means in terms of the Swan. Do we want to be a team that we have been up and about? We've been up in the top, the finals for, 6-7 years. Maybe it's just not possible anymore to do that year in, year out. We've, as I said, the last 2 premiers, Collingwood might still make it, but if Collingwood don't, the last 2 premiers have failed to make the finals the following year. And so I think that's good context to consider how long we've been up. And how challenging it must be even for the senior players to sort of keep coming back and pushing through and doing that hard work that they need to do.
Right, let's move on. We've talked a bit about the 𝗙cie game, but I'll quickly go through a bit of a summary. In a challenging round 19 clash, the 𝗙cie Demons faced Footscray Bulldogs at the Widden Oval, ultimately falling short by 56 points. The Demons were unable to match the Bulldogs' dominance, particularly in the midfield. The match began with the Bulldogs taking full advantage of the breezy conditions, quickly establishing their dominance with a 5-goal opening term against the Demons' solitary goal from Ben Brown. This setback set a tough precedence for 𝗙cie, who struggled to make significant inroads despite their best efforts. Despite narrowing the margin to 29 points by the final break, the Demons couldn't capitalise on the wind advantage in the last quarter. The Bulldogs responded with 7 consecutive goals, effectively sealing the match. Matt Jefferson kicked 4 goals throughout the game. Shane McAdam contributed with 2 goals from 15 disposals and 2 clearances. Luke Kentfield Tom Fullerton and 𝗠𝗲𝗀𝘀𝘁 each added a goal to the tally, with Fullerton also delivering an impressive all-round performance, including 20 disposals, 28 hitouts and 7 clearances. Bailey Laurie was a standout for 𝗚𝗍𝗄𝗁, topping the stat sheet with 29 disposals, 10 tackles and 8 clearances, but even his efforts couldn't turn the tide. Adam Tomlinson faced a tough challenge against the Bulldogs forwards, accumulating 23 disposals, 17 kicks and 5 marks. And as always, Mitch White fought hard with 21 disposals, 7 tackles and 6 clearances. Jack Billings and 𝗠𝗲𝗀𝗀𝘀𝗀 both had 18 disposals and 4 clearances. As the Demons head into the bye next week, they'll regroup and prepare for the final game of the home and away season against the Gold Coast Suns at People's First Stadium on Saturday, 17th of August. That's the same day we play, so it seems like it's going to be a curtain raiser. The team aims to finish the season on a high note, and it has been a disappointing season for 𝗚𝗍𝗁. We've pretty much talked all about it. Is there anything else you guys want to add about that game?
Just other than that, good numbers for Laurie.
Yeah.
So he probably should get props for that performance. Maybe it was just my mindset, but he didn't jump out at me in my mind of thinking to answer George's question. I didn't immediately go, oh, Laurie was awesome, but 29 disposals. And how many tackles did you say?
10 tackles, 8 clearances.
That's what you want to see.
Yeah. All right, injuries. The main injury news from Friday night's match was the rib injury to All-Australian Premiership defender Stephen May. May sustained fractures to his ribs. Melbourne General Manager of AFL Performance, Alan Richardson, said, pleasingly, there are no internal or underlying issues relating to the injury. I think he's alluding to the fact that track cops some pretty horrendous internal injuries, and Stephen has since been discharged from hospital and is recovering at home. The injury he sustained is the same ribs he injured earlier in the year. A return to play timeline will be determined in the coming days. I don't think we're going to see him for the rest of this season. Max, as we've said, was not at training today. It's usually the recovery session, but he was not there. And as someone said, his ankle looked quite big the other day. So, yes, folks, MFCSS is real. Let's get into changes.
Just before changes, you missed a question about Colt from
Radish. I did have that. I was just for time, but if you do want to, before we get into changes,
the short answer.
He's definitely a gun.
Radish
got a future.
Radish D says, I'm loving Colt. Has anyone on the panel noticed how often he pops up in the right areas in the forward line when a key forward is taking a mark or there's a scrap on the ground? The Colt seems to be there more often than not. With another pre-season under his belt, I think he'll jump up to another level. So, what do you have to say?
He's a natural footballer. He knows where to go and how to play, exactly. And he's got a touch of mongrel about him as well, which is needed in the midfield where he'll finish up sooner or later.
Yeah, round 1 next year, Colt and Windsor in that team after another pre-season under their belts.
Do we just play him in the midfield now? Just give him that taste of it for the rest of the year? I know, I really don't know.
Maybe. I mean, it's a bit sort of – it depends what you're wanting, really. To be honest, I'd rather him sit at half forward and kick some goals and get some feels rather than, get smashed up in the midfield. But he's a natural inside mid, isn't he?
Yeah.
So changes. Radelaide asks, with May likely to miss a couple of weeks, what should the makeup of our backline be? Doug Remus says, changes this week, out May, Melksham, Howes, Turner, Ian Tomlinson, Jefferson, Fullerton and Laurie. Controversial opinion, Melksham's little burst of energy he provided since returning is gone. I'd give him a week off and give Jeffo and Fullerton a taste. Jeffo is not quite ready physically, but he's got a natural forward craft. I'm also not a big fan of him, but bring Fullerton in to chop Max a bit. Poor bloke's literally on one leg, which would allow us to rest Max forward and use JVR as a sole forward where he plays much better. Also, Port's ruck stocks aren't much chop, so this would be a good week to have a look at it. Laurie the sub, can't see any of these changes happening except for May and Tomo. So George, followed by B-Man, what, if any, are your changes for this week?
Yeah, I think the Tomlinson May change is pretty well straightforward. The only one I would like to bring in just to give Max a cut out is not Fullerton. I'd prefer to bring Verrill in. I think there's more future in Verrill than there is in Fullerton.
He's a ruckman. He's going to be a ruckman. Fullerton's never going to be a ruckman, which is pretty much what Goody said in his presser. He's going if he makes it, it'll be as a forward, occasional run on the ball, was like a JVR style ruck.
Yeah, and that also takes the pressure off JVR. We're just killing him at the moment.
Yep.
We're killing Petty at the moment by expecting them. We've got nothing to lose now. This is the one that perhaps I think would be most advantageous to not only the player but the team and to Max as well, and those other players. So Verrill's 199. He's got a stronger body than what Fullerton has. Like I said, I think there's more future in Verrill, so here's a chance to run him in through the side. You can pick all the other changes that you might want to make here, there and everywhere. It's going to be the same ones in and out, the same sort of subs and things like that. But other than that, there's nothing else that I think we can really bring in that's going to change anything. Yeah.
Nothing will change. I'm actually really interested in selection this week in terms of the direction they go, because if they do bring Jefferson in of a role, like it's, obviously saying that the season's done and dusted, mathematically it pretty much is probably, but
what have we got to
finals?
What have we got to lose? I mean, we probably, let's face it, we don't want to win. Wouldn't you prefer to just finish as low as possible?
Well,
bank the draft picks, get an easier draw next year. I want us to win
every game, but
no, I understand
they
that.
might figure now's
real.
the time. I think we'll find out. I'll bet my bottom dollar we'll find out post-season. We'll know who's injured by who has to go in for surgery. Lever and May both look like they're crocs. Viney's got to get that shoulder sorted. I mean, he's at least 6 times this season. He's been writhing around in pain on the ground.
It happened last year as well. Those stingers.
Exactly. So it'll be really, I think, a big tell. This selection will be a big tell if they bring a Jefferson in, for instance, or even a Verrell. I think it's the queue in the rack, and they're going to get those players in for surgery ASAP.
Why not just try some things out just to see?
Because to try what? Like for what? I mean, it's
just to have a look in batch conditions.
If they do that, then again, that's the sign. If they pick that stronger side this week,
what more signs do you need?
Well, I mean, it's the saying.
I saw signs on Friday night. The queue was in the rack.
Yeah.
Well, maybe the players, maybe the coaches. It'll be interesting to see which way they go. One way they won't go is I suspect. Well, the other senior player who played on Friday at Casey was Benny Brown, and he worked hard. He worked like his backside off, but he looked super frustrated.
He's going to retire. He's going to retire, isn't he, at the end of the year? So why play?
The other one is Hunter. I can't see him playing another game of AFL footy. Would be my a huge tip.
So why play them? Yeah. And no offense, I love Benny Brown, and he helped win us a flag. But if he's not going to play next year, there's no. Why play him in the seniors? So he can play at Casey.
They're not going to play him in the seniors. They're not going to play either of them in the seniors.
Yeah, I'm just saying.
No,
you just mentioned his name. So, we're talking.
No, I just meant that they're probably both played their last game for Melbourne Footy Club.
Yeah,
and there's actually no disadvantage to us in terms of draft picks, which would have been the highlight of the season for us years ago. Not that we tank, because where we sit on the ladder, it's not going to make any difference if we lose the next 3 games. We might pick up one more draft place, and that'll be it.
Yeah,
we'll win the last 3.
That's my MFCSS. All of a sudden, we'll find something in the last 3 weeks and finish 9th. That'd be a disaster. That's the worst.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to beating Port and then reading on Demonland how that was really bad that we beat Port, because
Demonland will go into meltdown.
Port because they scored 148 points against. Oh, my God, what does that mean for the rest of the season?
What we should be doing is focusing all our attention on the very last game of the season.
If we can
just beat Collingwood.
That's our grand final.
My fantasy would be knocking them out of finals, but then also not affecting our ladder position, so we can benefit from draft picks. So let's roll that dice. It'd be great if we've got nothing to lose in terms of finishing lower or being able to finish higher, but knocking them out, that would be fantastic.
We're playing all the kids. We've put all of our senior players needing surgery. They're recovering at Epworth, and the Colt Jeffo kicks 6, and the Colt kicks 3 from a half forward flank, and we win by 6 goals against the Pies. That'll do for end of season for me.
Then I want the TV camera to just be on Eddie Cam for the whole game. That'll do it for me.
That's right. That gives me something positive to look forward to. Collingwood can make the finals, but needs to beat us in round whatever.
Well, they did it to us.
Whatever it is.
They did it to us in 2018. Yeah. We needed to beat them in the last game. 2017. Yeah,
17. Yeah.
Okay, so let's preview.
Before we wrap up, Andy, there's Travy14 in the chat room says that we've re-signed Langdon.
Yes, I did see that is true.
That is the greatest news to my ears for the last 6 or 8 weeks.
Re-signed Langdon until 2028, which is fantastic. We needed that.
I think he's been our best player for the past 2 weeks.
He's been great.
He's relentless.
So that's huge. And it's a really good point by Travy 14 because, we talked about it the last couple of weeks. Is the Colts resigned, Windsor's resigned, Langdon's resigned, Petty's resigned. I've resigned.
They really need to find another word for resign. Whenever I see that resigned, resign, it's always
Langdon's resigned or resigned.
Is there a?
It is positive, isn't it? It's a really positive that
good.
A player he could go. He is one player that we could trade and get value for. He could go to any other AFL club and be a walk-up best 22 player.
All right, let's, if you want to do a preview with the D's, still a very long shot mathematical chance to make the finals. This really is our last roll of the dice. We not only need to win, but we need to win big. However, the task is going to be made all the more difficult in that we are coming up against Port Adelaide, who absolutely embarrassed ladder leader Sydney last week to the tune of 112 points and keeping them to 5 goals whilst hitting the scoreboard 38 times themselves. B-Man, followed by George, how are we going to do the impossible and knock off the giant killers and claw back the much-needed percentage? And I almost said that with a straight face as well. So do we even need to discuss this?
I've got nothing. I don't know, exploit their poor defense by moving the ball quickly and spreading.
Have we given up? Are we tanking this podcast?
I haven't even looked. I haven't even turned my mind to it. I'm still dealing with Friday.
All right.
Porter in a pretty formidable position at the moment. I don't think they've really got any players not on the park at the moment. And unfortunately, we've got no answer to Rosie Butters.
I was just about to say, George, at least they haven't got an elite midfield. With players with speed to burn and quick hands.
Yeah, let's hope. We could probably do all right against Travis Boak, but I'm afraid Wines, Butters and Rosie will cut us the same way as Bontempelli, Liberatore and Treloar did this week.
What's the weather, Andy? I think it's looking all right.
I'm not even looking at that. It's freezing.
Let's hope it's
wet. And not spongy.
Yeah, now you've made me want to have a look. Bear with us. What day are we playing? Saturday night. Oh, it's 17 and sunny during the day. Doesn't look like there's going to be any precipitation, and there isn't. It's a total of 0 mils of rain. So no.
My enthusiasm will be out come Saturday, and I'll go to the ground hoping for a win. And if we do, fantastic. You can't, a win is what we're after. So I'll be there. That's 100% sure.
Yeah, I'll be there.
Likewise.
I will be there. And I'll be there the next week up on the Gold Coast to get some sun. That's sort of the only thing I'm looking forward to that weekend, but I have already booked tickets.
Should go. Can you go to both games? The Casey Gold Coast game? I think they're on the ladder.
Yeah. Well, now that it's on.
Go to both games. Do what I did on Friday.
Yeah, that'll be fun. We're a Gold Coast on the ladder, and their reserves are pretty up in the top.
I don't know. I haven't even looked at the VFL. I think they're a pretty decent side, aren't they?
Yeah, I'm sure they are.
They only play. I think they play Southport, and that's it. They played 12 games against Southport and 1 game against the Victorian team or some such thing.
Well, we'll talk about that game next week when we do a half-ass preview. Yeah. Okay, well, let's get into the thank yous. We're going to leave it there. We'll be back next week. If you want to listen to the show live, then please head on over to Demonland.com on Monday night at our new earlier time of 7:30 p.m. Thank you to our 5-star reviewer on Apple Podcasts. Thank you to Max Makes Me Gorny. Thank you to our voicemailer, Rose Star. Thank you to you. Thank you Your questions and comments form an integral part of the show. So thank you to our Demonland posters who submitted questions and comments. Thank you to the Pearl, Rhino88, At the Break of Gorn, Spirit of Norm Smith, Buck Naked, Nairobi Demon, Radish D, Lazy, Jabroni, Lefty, Bigfoot, McVeasy Like a Sunday Morning, Monocular, Radelaide, and Doug Reamer. And thank you to my co-hosts, George and Bimman, and thank you to you, our loyal listeners. Don't forget, leave us a 5-star review and a comment on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts from, and we'll read it out on the next show. Go Demons!
Go Red Leggers!
Come on, demons. Come on, demons. Come on, demons. Come on, demons. Come on, come on, come on, come on, demons. I've got this feeling